Hey, G-Dub-Dub, Maniac McGee and Mr. Simmons hanging out together in the home office. And are you ready for Chapter 9? John McNabb had never in his life met a kid he couldn't strike out, until the runt. Now, as he thought about it, he came to two conclusions. One, he couldn't stand having this blemish on his record. Two, if you beat a kid up, it's the same as striking him out. Not sure if that's true. So McNabb and his pals went looking for the kid. They called themselves the Cobras. Nobody messed with them, at least nobody in the West End. The Cobras had heard that the kid hung around the park and the tracks, and that's where they spotted him one Saturday afternoon on the tracks by the path that ran from the Oriole Street dead end to the park. He was down by Red Hill and heading away from them, book in hand, as usual. But the Cobras just stood there, stunned. "I don't believe it," one Cobra said. "It must be a trick," said another. "I heard about it, but I didn't believe it." It wasn't a trick, it was true. The kid was running on the rail. McNabb scooped up a handful of track stones. He launched one. He snarled, "He's dead, let's get him." By the time Maniac looked back, they were almost on him. He wobbled once, leapt from the rail to the ground, and took off. He was at the Oriole Street dead end, but his instinct said, no, not the street, too much open space. He stuck with the tracks. Coming into view above him was the house on Raco Hill, where he had eaten spaghetti. He could go there, to the whistling mother, the other kids, be safe. They wouldn't follow him in there, would they? Stones clanked off the steel rails. He darted left, skirted the dump, wove through the miniature mountain range of stone piles and into the trees, skiing on his heels down the steep bank and into the creek, frogs plopping, no time to look for stepping rocks, yells behind him now, war whoops, stones pelting the water, stinging his back. The other side, through the trees and picker bushes, past the armory jeeps and out to the Park Boulevard, past the Italian restaurant on the corner, the bakery, screeching tires, row houses, street alleys, cars, porches, windows, faces staring, faces, the town whizzing past Maniac, a blur of faces, each face staring from its own window, each face in its own personal frame, its own house, its own address. Some place to be when there was no other place to be. How lucky to be a face staring out from a window. And then, could it be? The voices behind him were growing faint. He slowed, turned, stopped. They were lined up, a block back. They were still yelling and shaking their fists, but they weren't moving off the curb. And now they were laughing. Why were they laughing? The Cobras were standing at Hector Street. Hector Street was the boundary between the East and West Ends, or, to put it another way, between the blacks and whites. Not that you never saw a white in the East End or a black in the West End. People did cross the line now and then, especially if they were adults, and it was daylight. But nighttime, forget it. And if you were a kid, day or night, forget it. Unless you had business on the other side, such as a sports team or school. But don't be just strolling along as if you belonged there, as if you weren't afraid, as if you didn't even notice you were a different color from everybody around you. The Cobras were laughing because they figured the dumb, scraggly runt would get out of the East End in about as good shape as a bare big toe in a convention of snapping turtles. As good shape as a bare big toe in a convention of snapping turtles. Okay, so snapping turtles have really powerful jaws. And if you have a bare foot in proximity to a snapping turtle, that would be dangerous. So they figured that he's probably not going to get out of the East End without being harmed. Chapter 10. Of course, Maniac didn't know any of that. He was simply glad the chase was over. He turned and started walking, catching his breath. East Chestnut, East Marshall, Green Street, Arch Street. He had been around here before. That first day with the girl named Amanda, other days jogging through. But this was Saturday, not a school day, and there was something different about the streets. Kids, all over. One of them jumped down from a front step and planted himself right in front of Maniac. Maniac had to jerk to a stop to keep from plowing into the kid. Even so, their noses were practically touching. Maniac blinked and stepped back. The kid stepped forward. Each time Maniac stepped back, the kid stepped forward. They traveled practically half a block that way. Finally, Maniac turned and started walking. The kid jumped around and plunked himself right in front of him again. He bit off a chunk of the candy bar that he was holding. "Where are you going?" he said. Candy bar flakes flew from his mouth. "I'm looking for Sycamore Street," said Maniac. "Do you know where it is?" "Yeah, I know where it is." Maniac waited, but the kid said nothing more. "Well, do you think you could tell me where it is?" Stone was softer than the kid's glare. "No." Stone was softer than the kid's glare is wonderful, okay? It's comparing the face of the kid who's talking to him, the glare on his face, the serious kind of maybe angry, upset, comparing it to stone. That's how hard it was. Softer than a kid's glare. "No." Maniac looked around. Other kids had stopped playing and were staring. Someone called, "Do 'em, Mars!" and someone else said, "Waste 'em!" The kid, as you probably guessed by now, was none other than Mars Bar Thompson. Mars Bar heard the calls, and the stone got harder. Then suddenly he stopped glaring. Suddenly he was smiling. He held up the candy bar an inch from Maniac's lips. "Want a bite?" Maniac couldn't figure. "You sure?" "Yeah, go ahead, take a bite." Maniac shrugged, took the Mars bar, bit off a chunk, and handed it back. "Thanks." Dead silence along the street. The kid had done the unthinkable. He had chomped on one of Mars Bar's own bars. Not only that, but white kids just didn't put their mouths where black kids had had theirs, be it soda bottles, spoons, or candy bars. And the kid hadn't even gone for the unused end. He had chomped right over Mars Bar's own bite marks. Mars Bar was confused. Who was this kid? What was this kid? As usual, when Mars Bar got confused, he got mad. He thumped Maniac in the chest. "You think you're bad or something?" Maniac, who was now twice as confused as Mars Bar, blinked. "Huh? You think you come down here and be bad? Is that what you think?" Mars Bar was practically shouting now. "No," said Maniac. "I don't think I'm bad. I'm not saying I'm an angel either. Not even real good. Somewhere in between, I guess." Mars Bar jammed his arms downward, stuck out his chin, and sneered. "Am I bad?" Maniac was befuddled, very confused. "I don't know. One minute you're yelling at me, the next minute you're giving me a bite of your candy bar." The chin jutted out even more. "Tell me I'm bad." Maniac didn't answer. Flies stopped buzzing. "I said, tell me I'm bad." Maniac blinked, shrugged, sighed. "It's none of my business. If you're bad, let your mother or father tell you." Now it was Mars Bar doing the blinking, stepping back, trying to sort things out. After a while, he looked down. "What's that?" Before Maniac answered, a book, Mars Bar had snatched it from his hand. "This ain't yours," he said. He flipped through some pages. "Looks like mine." "It's somebody else's." "It's mine. I'm keeping it." With rattlesnake speed, Maniac snatched the book back, except for one page, which stayed ripped in Mars Bar's hand. "Give me the page," said Maniac. Mars Bar grinned. "Take it, fish belly." Silence. Eyes. The flies were waiting. East End vultures. Suddenly, neither kid could see the other because a broom came down like a straw curtain between their faces, and a voice said, "I'll take it." It was the lady from the nearest house out to sweep her steps. She lowered the broom but kept it between them. "Better yet," she said to Mars Bar, "just give it back to him." Mars Bar glared up at her. There wasn't an 11-year-old in the East End who could stand up to Mars Bar's glare. In the West End, even high schoolers were known to crumble under the glare. To old ladies on both sides of Hector Street, it was all but fatal. And when Mars Bar stepped off a curb and combined the glare with his super slow dip stride slump shuffle, well, it was said he could back up traffic all the way to Bridgeport while he took 10 minutes to cross the street. But not this time. This time Mars Bar was up against an East End lady in her prime, and she was matching him eyeball for eyeball. And when it was over, only one glare was left standing, and it wasn't Mars Bar's. Mars Bar handed back the torn page, but not before he crumpled it into a ball. The broom pushed him away, turned him around, and swept him up the street. The lady looked down at Maniac. A little of the glare lingered in her eyes. You better get on, boy, where you belong. I can't be following you around. I got things to do. Maniac just stood there a minute. There was something he felt like doing, and maybe he would have, but the lady turned and went back inside her house and shut the door. So we walked away. And that is the end of chapter 10, and Dora will keep our spot for us. I've got a couple questions for you. The first one is, there was a whole bunch of language in that chapter that was about describing stuff, but I remember it said that the flies stopped buzzing and the glare was like stone. These are ways that authors use to convey or give you the impression of what's going on. They're really kind of sophisticated, and what they do is they tell you what's going on, but in a different way. These two things are called metaphors. I'll write that right here. A metaphor is describing something by using something else. So for example, if you said Louis was a giant, you would imply or infer that he was really big and tall. Yes? If you said that Mr. Simmons was a mouse, you might think that he was quiet and timid and shy and had long whiskers, which of course he does, but he doesn't have as much hair on his head. So a metaphor is a way that an author tells you something, describes something to you, but it doesn't tell you right outright. He doesn't say Louis was really tall and big. He says Louis was a giant. All right, so that's the end of chapter 10. Look for metaphors in your reading. And if you find one, email it to me or take a picture and send it to me. I love you and I miss you. Bye.